Welcome back to another segment of Behind the Scenes of the Waltons. Today I'm going to be taking more of your questions in another segment of Ask Judy. If you enjoy these segments, please do hit like and subscribe. I wanted to share with all of you that I'm going to be attending a couple of days at the Marshfield Cherry Blossom Festival this year. I've been there several times before, and it's always a fun weekend with lots of great guests, celebrities, and various different descendants of presidents. So always a fascinating group of people. I will be there on Thursday, April 23rd for a luncheon. And then I will stay on for Friday for the meet and greet and autograph signing and various different things like that. I'll be bringing photos and CDs and stuff to be available to sell. So if you're able to make it to Marshfield on that weekend, I will look forward to seeing you. This question is from JRIJR, who said, at some point, can you talk about what the experience was like to have guests come on set? If a family member wanted to come or a friend, how did that work? Obviously, The Waltons was done before social media and instant news, but if the storyline was significant, would guests be turned away? Any insights you have would be appreciated. So obviously, the studio was not someplace that people could just drive up and come in. So if somebody wanted to invite a family member or a friend or somebody to come to the set, it would have to be cleared through the assistant director, and then we would ask for a drive-on pass. We were able to do that at that point in time. So that person's name would be given to a particular gate at the studio. We'd tell them what gate they could enter. And when the person arrived, they would give their name and it would be checked against that list. And then they would be given a parking pass and sent to wherever it was we were filming. Our set was never a closed set. It was one of the few sets that the tours could come onto. At the Warner Brothers lot, people got to go onto working sets, and ours was one of them because it wasn't a closed set that we frequently had guests, tour buses, or not really tour buses, because they didn't have the big buses and trams like Universal does, but they would walk onto the set and be able to watch for a period of time. So for our guests, then once they arrived, they would be kind of given the heads up about the red light. If there was a red light flashing, circling, they had these red lights that circled. If we were on an exterior set, if you were on the soundstage, there'd be a big red light at the entrance doors to the soundstage. And if that was on, then it meant do not enter. We're filming. So once the light went off, then you could enter. And then, they would just come and they'd hang out and we'd spend time with them. Some of my friends got to, meet various members of the cast and hang out and stuff. Sometimes they'd join us for lunch or whatever. I would not invite guests personally if I had particularly heavy emotional scenes to do. It was just, I needed to be able to focus on that. Maybe there were times if we said, hey, I want somebody to come by, perhaps there might have been an occasion where the assistant director said, that's not going to be a good day because maybe we had a particular guest star that they wanted to be sensitive to if they were going to have difficult material. But otherwise, it was pretty much people could, come and visit. We didn't have a ton of guests all the time. So it was a limited sort of thing. With the tours that came in, again, the tour guide would come into the set. They'd speak to the assistant director and say, I have a tour of X number of people, and would it be all right to bring them in? And where would you like us to stand? So we're out of the way. And if it was okay, then they would be allowed to enter and stand and just be quiet when we were filming. So various different people got to also come and catch pieces of what was being filmed. This is from Stephen Veith, who said, do you have any information on the character who played Hawthorne's son, Cloudy? Just curious. Really enjoy your channel. Thank you. Cloudy, this is, of course, we're referring to The Homecoming, and Cloudy was Hawthorne Dooley's son. I looked him up, and I did not find any other information. It looked almost like it was the only job he ever did. So I don't know if he was a relative or had some particular connection as to why they hired him. But he did work both at the soundstage in LA when we filmed interiors, because he came in to invite all the kids to go and to see the missionary lady down at Ike's store. And then, of course, in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, he was there with us when we were at that. So pretty good gig for the young actor to get to work in both those locations. I wish I knew more. If I find out more, I will share it with you. Melody Rose asked this question. I know this is not the right video to ask, but in the show The Christmas Carol, when Grandpa takes Elizabeth and the two English children to get a tree, there is a nice lake in the background. Where was that filmed? And thank you so much for watching. No worries. You can put questions about any episode or whatever in any of the comments. So that was filmed at Franklin Canyon. There was a reservoir there, and that was quite often when you saw a bigger body of water, unlike the smaller Drusilla's Pond. That would have been at Franklin Canyon, and we would use the reservoir. The same reservoir that was used at the opening credits of the Andy Griffith Show when they are whistling along and going fishing. And you see that same lake there. And it was used in a number of episodes when you saw that we had that larger expanse of lake. A nice comment here from Jetstream, who said, interesting that in the Homecoming pilot, the role of Grandpa was played by Edgar Bergen. If you ever saw the 1948 movie I Remember Mama, Ellen Corby's character as the youngest of the four Hanson sisters gets engaged to Mr. Torkelson, played by Edgar Bergen. I enjoyed this particular movie because it was about a Norwegian immigrant family with the children born in San Francisco. Story takes place in 1910. Makes me think of my father being the first Canadian born to a Norwegian immigrant family the first decade of the 20th century. That's so nice. Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, perhaps I'll have to take a look back and do a little bit of an overview of the movie I Remember Mama. This from Daisy Nona, who said, can you talk about Elizabeth, Cammie's relationship with her dad, Ralph? It always looked so natural. She'd eat from his plate, sit on his lap, or maybe have her talk about those memories and her relationship with him. Yeah, I'll have to have Cammie back on, and we'll talk a bit about that, her relationship when she was young with the various different, particularly Ralph. And he did have a wonderful relationship with all of the young children. I've talked about that with him, with the young toddlers who played John Curtis, or with Ginny, or, when he held baby Charlie, things like that. It was just always so sweet to see. Early on we saw Elizabeth quite frequently sitting in Daddy's lap, or things like that, and him picking her up. And over the seasons, of course, that relationship grew, and she was getting a little too big to sit in his lap, but they were still always quite close. And I was particularly moved by, in later seasons, the episode The Yearning, when she is so heartbroken when the new Reverend Andy March doesn't return her affections and her budding crush on him. And he tries to be really gentle with her, but she's still heartbroken. And the daddy comes and has, just a more mature talk with her about her feelings and whatnot. And then she decides she will go dancing with him. And we see her all dressed up, and also that we get to see her dance with Daddy towards the end of the episode. So she did. That was a really sweet relationship between father and the youngest daughter, and then the baby of the family. Also, regarding the episode The Yearning, Eva Cup had a couple of questions here. It said, 2 things I noticed in this episode. Where was Grandma? She was missing from the table. Yes, at the beginning when we first had dinner and invite the new Reverend, and he's staying with us because he has been sprayed by a skunk. We do not see Grandma there. So it could have been that they were trying to minimize the days that Ellen worked, because it was just, it was hard for her. It was, she tired more easily. So they might have felt her presence wasn't necessary in the scene. Maybe she was not feeling well that day. So it could have been any number of reasons why she was missing and why it wasn't explained where she was. And then you said, in the scene where Elizabeth is leaving cookies in the shed and Mama comes and talks to her about the dress material, there's a point where we are close up on, more or less on Elizabeth, and you can see a partial wall of the shed, and then it looks like a sound stage with 2 cardboard boxes in view. Is this another case of widescreen modern view and old school box frame filming? Try that one again fast. Modern view and old school box frame filming. Got it? So I took a look at that, and what I see is that I think this is definitely not a case of the framing, because it is like right behind where Elizabeth is. So it isn't sort of off to the edge of the screen there. So this was in the shed prior to, it's kind of an in-between phase of the shed. John Boy was using it for his printing press and, the Blue Ridge Chronicle. And then we're in season 7 here, and it was later in season 7 when Ben married Cindy, and then they took over the shed and made it their home. So at this point, I think it's just meant to show that the shed is mostly being used for storage, and the front part maybe is being used if they suddenly have someone who needs to stay there, which is the case here with the Reverend. But otherwise, the back is sort of set decorated to just look like, you see some papers back there, so that could have been stuff left over from John Boy's Blue Ridge Chronicle. And boxes are probably just meant to be storage of things that the family is storing in there. So that's what's going on with that set, and definitely not a case of the wider frame. Thank you so much for joining me for this segment of Behind the Scenes of the Waltons, Ask Judy. If you have a question, do put it in the comments for any episode. And as I read through the comments, regardless of what episode they're from, I grab the ones that I think you would enjoy hearing an answer to. So I will see you next time for more Behind the Scenes of the Waltons, more Ask Judy, and some more special sorts of segments that I have in mind. Thanks for watching.